The boardroom was silent, except for the pounding in Ethan's chest, and he wondered how everything he built could collapse in a single morning. Ethan said, "This can't be real, not after all the years of sacrifice." His voice cracked as he scanned the angry faces staring back at him. The investors who once praised his vision now whispered like vultures, tallying his failure as if it were inevitable. The projection screen behind him displayed red numbers bleeding across the financial charts. It was more than numbers, it was the slow public execution of his dream. Ethan said, "I gave this company everything, and you turn your backs now." His words met only silence, the kind that suffocates and condemns. The betrayal stung deeper, because one of those cold eyes belonged to someone he trusted most. His supposed partner leaned back, arms crossed, a smirk, faint but devastating. The world Ethan knew was crumbling. His business wasn't just in danger, it was already falling. This was the moment his story began, not with triumph but with devastation. The meeting ended without applause, without hope, just the sound of chairs scraping across polished wood. Ethan stepped out of the boardroom, his heart racing as if trying to escape his chest. The hallway felt longer than ever, every step dragging the weight of failure. Ethan said, "How did I let this happen?" He tried to remember the first spark of his dream, back when he believed he could change the world with his business. But now, the dream mocked him. Glass walls revealed a skyline he once admired, now seeming to sneer at him. He felt like an imposter, a man who fooled himself into believing he could win. Every investor who once shook his hand with pride, now avoided his eyes. His partner's betrayal replayed in his mind like a cruel loop. He wasn't just losing money, he was losing himself. Outside the building, the air was sharp with late autumn chill, and Ethan tightened his coat against the wind. The city bustled around him, people rushing with purpose while his steps dragged as if weighted by stones. Ethan said, "They move like the world didn't just end." Car horns blared, neon signs flickered, and the world refused to pause for his collapse. He stopped at the corner, staring at his reflection in a cafe window. Unshaven, tired, and broken. He remembered the young dreamer who once stood here years ago, filled with fire and belief. That man was gone, replaced by shadows and regret. The betrayal cut deeper than the financial ruin, because it came from someone he once trusted with everything. The cafe door opened behind him, releasing warmth and chatter, and Ethan stepped inside, desperate for a moment of refuge. The smell of roasted coffee wrapped around him, bittersweet like his memories. He sat at a corner table, shoulders hunched, watching strangers laugh, as if life owed them joy. Ethan said, "I used to feel that light." He unfolded his crumpled papers, staring again at the sea of red. His chest tightened. This wasn't just business, it was his life's identity unraveling. He feared becoming invisible, a cautionary tale of wasted potential. He pressed his palms against his eyes, fighting tears. He didn't notice when someone pulled the chair across from him, only the sound of it scraping the wooden floor. A calm voice cut through his spiral. "You don't look like a man ready to quit." Ethan lifted his head, startled to see Robert, his mentor, sitting there with the same steady eyes as always. Robert was the one man who had seen Ethan at his best and his worst. "Ow," Ethan said. "I don't know if I have anything left." Robert leaned forward, his voice low but firm. "You've always had something left. You just forgot where to look." In that moment, Ethan felt the first flicker of something he hadn't felt all day, hope. The cafe hummed softly in the background, but Ethan only heard Robert's steady voice guiding him back from the edge. Robert said, "I've seen you climb from nothing once, and you can do it again." Ethan lowered his gaze, ashamed. "I'm not the same man anymore," he whispered. But Robert leaned forward, his eyes burning with conviction. "That's right. You're stronger now, even if you don't see it yet." Ethan remembered the first days of his business, when he sketched ideas on napkins, fueled only by belief. Those nights he worked under a flickering lamp, his heart louder than the silence. Robert reminded him of that fire. "Don't forget why you started," he said firmly. For the first time in days, Ethan's chest rose not from fear, but from the faint spark of belief. The world had tried to strip him bare, but maybe, just maybe, he wasn't finished yet. Later that night, Ethan walked home under a sky heavy with clouds, replaying Robert's words. The streets glistened from a recent rain, reflecting neon lights that danced across the pavement. Ethan said, "Stronger now. Then why does it feel like I'm breaking?" His shoes splashed through puddles, but he barely noticed. The city pressed against him, alive with people chasing dreams, while he felt like a man who had lost his map. Yet in his chest, something stirred, fragile but undeniable. He remembered the moment he first told his friend Claire about his idea, years ago. She laughed, not in mockery, but in belief. She was the first to tell him he could actually make it real. That memory warmed him against the chill night, and he whispered, "I can't let her down." For the first time his steps quickened, not toward an ending, but toward a possibility. The next morning, sunlight broke through Ethan's blinds, sharp and unforgiving. He sat at his cluttered desk, surrounded by unpaid bills, unopened letters, and stacks of notes. Ethan said, "This is where it all started, and this is where I'll decide if it ends." He touched a faded photo pinned to his corkboard. Him and Claire years ago, holding their first mock-up of the product, grinning like fools who didn't know fear. His chest tightened, but determination lit his eyes. The silence of his apartment was broken by a message alert. His phone lit with Claire's name, her words simple, "Don't give up yet." He stared at the screen, his hand trembling. Even when he doubted himself, someone still believed. He clenched his fist, whispering, "Not yet. Not like this." The day ahead was no lighter, but he was ready to face it with something stronger than fear. By afternoon, Ethan found himself at Claire's studio, the place where ideas once bloomed like wildfire. The walls were covered in sketches, prototypes, and reminders of their shared vision. Claire looked up from her workbench, her eyes soft yet firm. "You look like a man carrying the world," she said gently. Ethan gave a broken laugh. "Feels more like it's crushing me." Claire wiped her hands, walking closer. "Then let me carry some of it." For a moment, silence filled the space, heavy with old memories and unspoken regrets. Ethan remembered the countless nights they dreamed together, planning how they'd change everything. The betrayal from others had shaken him, but here he felt safe. Claire smiled faintly. "And the Ethan I knew didn't stop when things got hard. He fought harder." Her words struck deep, and he felt his chest rise with stubborn fire. That night, Ethan sat alone on his rooftop, the city sprawling endlessly beneath him. The air was cool, the stars faint above the glow of neon and streetlights. He thought of Robert's wisdom, Claire's faith, and his own broken reflection. Ethan said, "If I don't fight now, everything dies here." His heart still ached, but the fire was growing, refusing to be smothered. He replayed his failures like scars, but this time, they weren't chains. They were proof he had survived worse. He whispered into the night, "I will not quit." The wind carried his words into the city, as if daring the world to listen. Alone but not defeated, Ethan knew his story wasn't ending. It was only beginning again, forged in fire, rebuilt on grit. And with that promise, he finally stood taller, ready for the storm that was coming. The next week brought no relief, only heavier shadows. Ethan walked into the office, his team avoiding his eyes like he was already a ghost. Computers hummed, but silence filled the air with judgment. Ethan said, "They don't trust me anymore." His chest ached as he spotted Sarah, his most loyal employee, working with her head down. She once believed in every word he said, but now even her silence screamed doubt. At the far corner, Lucas' voice echoed, too loud, too commanding. He was already acting like he owned the room. Ethan clenched his jaw, realizing betrayal was no longer whispered. It was staged in daylight. His empire wasn't crumbling in secret anymore. It was falling in front of everyone. By afternoon, the board summoned Ethan to an emergency meeting. The air inside was colder than the day his downfall began. He sat across from investors, who no longer saw him as a leader, but as a liability. One said, "We can't afford another mistake." Ethan's throat tightened as he tried to defend himself, but their expressions stayed rigid, carved in stone. Lucas slid into the room uninvited, his smirk intact, as if fate had written him into Ethan's tragedy. Ethan said, "You're not supposed to be here." Lucas chuckled softly. "Maybe I should be." The betrayal became clear. Lucas was weaving himself into the company's future, while Ethan was being erased. That night, Ethan collapsed at his desk, exhaustion pulling at every bone. Bills stacked like bricks of doom, and he buried his head in his hands. The city lights outside blinked indifferently, as if mocking his despair. His phone buzzed, a message from Claire, "Don't give him the victory. Fight." He stared at it, torn between surrender and defiance. Ethan said, "Why do you still believe when even I don't?" He remembered her laughter from their early days, the way she saw light where he saw darkness. Tears blurred his vision, but beneath them burned a rage he hadn't felt in years. The kind of rage that forged fighters, not quitters. The next morning, Ethan stormed into Lucas's office, fists clenched, fury pulsing through him. Ethan said, "You're tearing down everything we built." Lucas leaned back, unbothered, his smirk like poison. "Correction," he said calmly. "I'm saving it from you." Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears, but Lucas's arrogance was ice cold. Their eyes locked, one with fire, the other with calculated cruelty. Ethan slammed his hand on the desk, papers scattering like broken promises. "This company was my life," he roared. Lucas's smile only widened. "Exactly," he whispered. "And that's why you'll lose it." That evening, Ethan sat with Robert again, his anger spilling like wildfire. Ethan said, "He's destroying me, and no one cares." Robert listened, eyes calm but sharp. "Then stop fighting him on his terms," he said. Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" Robert leaned forward, voice steady. "You've been trying to play his game, but his game is built on greed. Play yours, the one built on vision." Ethan's chest tightened, realization dawning. Robert wasn't giving him a plan, but a reminder. Ethan said softly, "My vision, it's the only thing he can't take." That moment planted a seed, fragile yet unstoppable. The storm came on a Thursday afternoon. Ethan was called into an unscheduled meeting, only to discover the truth waiting like a knife in his back. As he entered, the investors sat not with doubt, but with decision. At the head of the table, Lucas smiled like a victor. Ethan's blood ran cold as the chairman announced, "Lucas has proposed a buyout. Effective immediately, control shifts." Ethan said, "You planned this from the start?" His voice trembled, rage clashing with disbelief. Lucas leaned forward, his tone dripping poison. "Not from the start. Only after you showed me how weak you really are." Ethan's chest constricted, memories flooding, the trust, the promises, the nights of building together. It all crumbled with those words. He realized the betrayal wasn't casual, it was calculated. He wasn't just losing a company. He was being erased from his own story. Ethan staggered out of the meeting, his legs unsteady, his heart heavier than stone. In the hallway, Sarah caught his arm, her eyes brimming with fear. "What happened?" she whispered. Ethan shook his head, unable to form words. His silence said it all. Sarah's voice cracked. "He's taking everything, isn't he?" Ethan met her gaze, his voice hoarse. "He already has." For the first time, Sarah's composure broke, and tears welled in her eyes. She had fought beside him for years, but even she couldn't shield him now. As the reality settled, Ethan felt the walls close in, suffocating him. He was no longer a leader in their eyes. He was just a man stripped of everything, walking through ruins no one else could see. That night, Ethan confronted Lucas outside the building. Rain poured relentlessly, washing the city streets in silver streaks. Ethan shouted over the storm, "Why? We built this together." Lucas's face stayed cold beneath the umbrella, his suit untouched by the weather. "Because you were never strong enough to win," he replied, voice sharp and steady. Ethan's fists clenched, every muscle burning with rage. This wasn't about the company, it was about destroying me. Lucas smirked. And you made it easy. Lightning cracked above, illuminating Ethan's face twisted with fury and heartbreak. He finally saw Lucas not as a partner, but as the enemy who would rather burn everything than share success. Ethan collapsed into his apartment that night, drenched and broken. He tore the tie from his neck and dropped onto the couch, shaking from more than cold. Robert's voice echoed in his memory. "Play your game," he whispered into the silence. "What game? I have nothing left." His gaze drifted across the clutter of failed notes and unpaid bills. For a moment, he saw only ruins. But then his eyes fell on the corkboard, where his first vision sketch still hung, faded but alive. Claire's message buzzed again on his phone. "He can't steal what's in your heart." Ethan clutched the phone, tears streaming. The betrayal had gutted him, but the spark of his dream still flickered, defying the storm. The next morning, Ethan woke not with relief, but with a sharp clarity. The betrayal no longer consumed him, it fueled him. He stood before the mirror, eyes sunken but burning with resolve. Ethan said, "You can take my company, but not my vision." His reflection stared back. A man scarred yet unbroken. The storm had stripped him bare, but what remained was raw strength. He wasn't fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting to reclaim the dream that started it all. With trembling hands, he began gathering his notes, his sketches, his ideas. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The battle wasn't over. It had just begun. Days later, Ethan sat in a dim conference room with Robert and Claire, preparing for the pitch that could decide his future. His new plan wasn't polished, but it was his. Robert said, "This is riskier than anything you've done." Claire added, "And that's why it might actually work." Ethan exhaled, fear and hope colliding in his chest. "If I fail now, it's over. But if I win, everything changes." The weight of their eyes reminded him that he wasn't fighting alone. His hand hovered over the slides, shaking but steadying. This wasn't the same Ethan who had begged investors weeks ago. This was a man ready to fight on his own terms, with vision as his only weapon. On pitch day, Ethan walked into the investor hall. The air was thick with skepticism, but his steps were steady. He thought of Lucas, of betrayal, of everything taken from him. Ethan said quietly, "This is my decision." He stood before the panel, his slides flickering to life behind him. Gone were the desperate pleas. His voice was steady, sharp, alive with vision. He painted the future not with numbers alone, but with passion that bled from every word. The investors exchanged uncertain glances, their expressions shifting. For the first time, Ethan wasn't begging for approval. He was commanding belief. Halfway through, an investor interrupted. "Why should we trust you after your collapse?" The words struck sharp, but Ethan didn't flinch. He said, "Because failure isn't the end. It's proof I know what not to do." The room went silent. His eyes burned as he continued, "I've been betrayed, broken, humiliated. But I'm still here, and I know exactly why I'll win this time." The investors leaned closer, drawn not by his numbers but by his unshakable conviction. For once, Ethan wasn't selling a product. He was selling himself, the fighter who had clawed his way back from ashes. By the end, the room erupted not with applause, but with something better. Silence heavy with respect. One investor finally nodded. "You've convinced me." Another followed. The tide turned before Ethan's eyes. He exhaled, gripping the podium as relief crashed over him. Lucas wasn't here, but Ethan felt his shadow lingering. He whispered to himself, "This is for me, not for him." Robert's words echoed, "Play your game." Claire's faith filled his chest. For the first time in months, Ethan felt like the man he once was, only stronger. He hadn't just survived betrayal, he had transformed it into power. That night, Ethan stood again on the rooftop, the city alive beneath him. But this time his heart wasn't heavy, it was ablaze. He said softly, "One decision changed everything. The betrayal hadn't destroyed him, it had forged him. The skyline that once mocked now gleamed like an ally. The journey ahead was uncertain, but he no longer feared it. He wasn't the man who lost everything, he was the man who rebuilt from nothing. His dream was alive, and so was he. With the wind against his face and fire in his chest, Ethan finally smiled, knowing this was only the beginning. The following week, Ethan returned to the office, not as a man clinging to power, but as a leader with a new beginning. Some employees still looked at him with doubt, but Sarah stepped forward, her voice steady. "We're with you if you're truly ready to fight." Ethan's chest tightened with gratitude. He said, "I won't fail you again, not this time." The silence in the room shifted, no longer heavy with judgment, but alive with possibility. His people didn't need perfection, they needed proof of his resilience. And for the first time in months, Ethan was ready to give it. At a small cafe later, Ethan sat across from Claire, his notebook open between them. They sketched ideas with the same reckless excitement they once had years ago. Claire laughed, shaking her head. "You've always been crazy enough to try." Ethan smiled faintly. "And you've always been stubborn enough to believe in me." The napkin between them filled with scribbles and arrows, a reminder that even after destruction, creativity still bloomed. For Ethan, it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about building something that mattered, something that no betrayal could erase. That evening, Robert joined Ethan for a quiet walk through the park. The leaves rustled in the breeze, autumn reminding them of change. Robert said, "I've seen too many people fold under pressure, but you bent, you didn't break." Ethan looked down, voice low. "I thought I had lost everything." Robert smiled faintly. "You only lost what you didn't need." The words settled deep, heavier than advice. They were true. Ethan realized the storm hadn't stolen his dream. It had burned away the weakness that held him back. Back at his apartment, Ethan organized his cluttered desk. The bills remained, but so did the sketches, ideas, and fragments of vision. For the first time in months, he felt clarity in the chaos. Ethan whispered, "This is where it starts again." He pinned new sketches beside the old ones, blending past and future into a single map. The scars of failure were still there, but they no longer defined him. They became part of the blueprint of something greater. Later that night, Ethan stood at his window, watching the city breathe with restless energy. For weeks it had mocked him, but now it felt like a partner, daring him to rise. He whispered, "I'm not afraid anymore." The skyline reflected not the ruin of what was lost, but the promise of what could still be built. The betrayal had not ended him, it had freed him. For the first time in months, Ethan closed his eyes and smiled, knowing tomorrow he would fight not to reclaim what was gone, but to create what was waiting. The next morning, Ethan walked into the investor hall again, not as a beggar but as a man with vision in his veins. Every step echoed with defiance, every breath with conviction. His voice rang clear as he greeted the panel. "I'm here because I believe in what comes next." The investors leaned forward, sensing the difference. Ethan wasn't just presenting ideas. He was offering a future. During the pitch, Ethan spoke not only of products but of resilience. "Failure doesn't define us. How we rise does," he said, voice steady. The words silenced the room. He wasn't selling numbers anymore. He was selling belief, his belief. And slowly, the room shifted. The investors saw not a desperate man, but a survivor who refused to bow. As the presentation ended, silence held for a moment. Then one investor stood. "You've convinced us," she said firmly. The others nodded in agreement. Relief surged through Ethan, but more than that, pride. He hadn't just survived betrayal, he had won because of it. Ethan whispered under his breath, "This is what I was meant for." The past no longer chained him. It had transformed him. That evening, Ethan returned to the rooftop one last time. The city pulsed with light beneath him, alive with promise. He whispered, "This isn't an ending, it's my rebirth." The skyline shimmered like an old adversary turned ally, daring him to dream bigger than before. His heart was no longer heavy. It was light, alive, and fearless. In the final moment, Ethan closed his eyes, inhaled the cool night air, and smiled. His journey had broken him, betrayed him, and nearly destroyed him. But in that crucible, he found his strength. He whispered, "One decision changed everything." The words carried into the night, echoing across the city like a promise. This was no longer the story of a man who lost it all. It was the story of the man who rose again.